Hey there, YouTubers. I just got back from 11 days in Yosemite, where I was able to go on 2 separate backpacking trips, one on the first weekend and one on the second weekend. In this video, I'm going to share with you 4 pieces of gear that really worked well for me during this trip, and then 4 pieces of gear that didn't work so well for me during this trip. On the first weekend, I actually was supposed to hike out from the Happy Isles trailhead, and I was unable to do that because of partial closure of the park, because of the snowpack and all of the flooding concerns from the melt that's going on. That weekend there was actually a bit of a heat wave going on, which was kind of advantageous, I guess you could say, because I was hiking in shorts and kind of like a lightweight shirt, and it was kind of like summer. And because of those conditions, I actually decided to try cowboy camping for the first time. If you're not familiar with what that term is, basically it means that you're camped out under the stars without having an actual tent. This was the ground sheet that I used, and I just kind of put all my stuff on this and slept out under the stars, which worked out really pretty well, I would say. And the second weekend, I went up the Yosemite Falls Trail. I've been to Yosemite now 25 times, and that was actually the first time that I've been all the way to the top of the Falls Trail. That was pretty cool. It's an amazing hike. I would highly encourage anyone who's going to Yosemite to check that out. The weather was really poor that weekend. It had been raining pretty much all day leading up to the time that I actually started my hike, and the day before as well was snow on the ground and snow. And so I was a bit concerned because I had looked out in the forecast, as far as I could, the 10-day forecast when I did all my pack and my prep, and I didn't necessarily expect to be encountering conditions in the teens Fahrenheit. Under 20 degrees was quite cold. There was rain, there was snow, there was hail, and all of that. And so it was a bit of an adventure, but I made it back in one piece. All right, so let's get into the gear. What didn't work so well for me? First of all, trekking poles. I actually had a gear failure. This trekking pole from Z-Packs, I only used one pole, and I went out on the hike from the Pohono Trail, and I expected to encounter snow, and so I brought snowshoes, and once I got up to about 6,000 feet where the snow line was at, I got out the trekking pole too, because it just helps sometimes if you're falling through the snow or you're slipping and sliding, to be able to have something to hang on to or push into the ground to keep you from falling over as much. And so about 1 mile into that portion of the snow where I was hiking over snow or snowshoeing over the snow, I actually was pushing down on the pole, and I realized that it was just going straight into the snow. And ultimately what happened was, I'm pretty sure that it cracked off because of the fact that I was actually still pushing the pole and the cup through the snow. There was just so much snow, and I was slipping a lot, that I think what happened was, as I was pushing it down into the snow and walking forward, that as I lifted it up and out of the snow, the force of that pulling down on that cup at that point just caused it to fail and get pulled off. Now the unfortunate thing was I didn't have another pole to rely on or a replacement cup out there with me, and so I just had to kind of deal with it. Now, if you were hiking over hard ground or anything like that, this really wouldn't be a concern for you. You don't actually need to have that pole cup thing on there at the bottom if you're doing that. However, because of the fact that it was over snow, when I was pushing it down into the snow, if this was the snow, it was literally going this far down into the snow every time I took a stab at the snow. So it really wasn't that effective for me. So even though it was broken at that point, I still continued to use it, and it did give me some sort of resistance as I pushed it down. There would be a point at which it would actually compress the snow where I was pushing it down in and give me some resistance there. So what would I do differently in the future if I was expecting to hike primarily over snow? I think what I would do is I would use a pole end cup here that had more of a thick kind of basket on it. I'm not sure if Z-Packs offers a replacement piece for that is the larger size. I've looked at their site. They actually do have, for $10, you can buy replacement end pieces here. So I may do that at some point. I don't really use these a whole heck of a lot these days. However, I would like to make them whole again, so I'll probably fix that or correct it at some point. But for hiking over snow, snowshoeing, stuff like that, I'm going to probably want to have something with like a proper basket on there. So as I'm pushing it down into the snow, that it's not actually going through the snow quite as much, and hopefully it won't fail on me. Another piece of gear that didn't work quite so well for me was actually my quilt. This is an Enlightened Equipment Revelation. This is a 20F when I bought it 6 years ago, that's what they sewed into the label. If you were to buy the 20F these days, it would have more fill. So according to their site today, I think this would be more like a 30F. And that probably would have been fine for me if the weather turned out to be like the weather forecast was when I was looking out in the 10-day. And actually that first weekend, it was like a heat wave. And the first night of the first weekend, I was definitely comfortable in this. I didn't feel cold at all. But on the second night, it was windy. And that wind just brought down my temperature, my body temp, and I was struggling to stay warm. And I wish I had had something warmer. Now on the second weekend, it was in the teens, and I really, again, didn't have any choice because this was the only quilt I had, so I brought some extra bottom layer and then another fleecy layer for the top, and that helped a little bit. But if I could do it over again, and I knew I was going to be camping on top of snow and cowboy camping like that, or experiencing temps in the teens, I would have absolutely have wanted something warmer. I actually have, again, a 6-year-old version of this quilt, which I think is a 15F. I wouldn't have even brought that. I would have brought this other quilt, which this other quilt I have is a UGQ Bandit, and this has 950 fill weight down, and it's a 0-degree version, and it's actually customized. In the top portion here, I had 3 ounces of extra fill added, and then in the bottom, there's also 3 ounces of extra fill. The other thing about this, at the bottom here, it has a sewn foot box with down actually across the bottom here. Now, if you compare that to the bottom of the Enlightened Equipment Revelation, when you cinch the bottom of this quilt, it just compresses all the down that's there, as well as the fact that this little portion right here at the very bottom where the tie zips it and clips it shut doesn't have any down in it. So compared to the bottom part of this, I mean, it's night and day difference. So definitely would have loved to have had this for both weekends, especially cowboy camping, sleeping out under the stars. This would have just been so much warmer. The other thing about this is it's a long, wide version. It would have enabled me to pull it up over my head if I was getting, blown by wind and stuff like that. It also has a really neat kind of feature on the side here with some tensioners. So things like as you're sleeping on your side or rolling around and you experience maybe drafts and stuff like that, you can actually cinch that up a little bit, which basically causes it to kind of pull in a little bit, and then you have less issues with drafts. So would have absolutely have loved to have had this in hindsight, and any future trips where I'm going to be going on something that's maybe extended over a couple of weeks and there's a potential for having different temps on one weekend versus the other. I'm going to bring a range of quilts with me just to cover all my bases. Okay, number 3 is actually a combination of gear issue and bad advice. When I went to Yosemite, I stopped into the wilderness office before I started my first weekend trip. I wanted to talk to the rangers and just ask a few questions, and part of what I wanted to find out was whether or not I was going to need to melt snow up there. I had anticipated that possibility, and so I was really prepared for that. I have a specific type of stove, which is a Snow Peak. It's an MSR Wind Pro 2, and I also have a specific pot that I use with that, and it is better to have a wide pot when you're melting snow because the snow is what needs to melt in there, and having a wider bottom actually helps with transferring the heat and melting snow. Also, the Wind Pro 2, you can use in an inverted style, which helps for when this canister gets really cold. It doesn't put out the same amount of pressure, and so the Wind Pro 2 would have worked in an upside down configuration. So when I went into the wilderness office, I asked them about melting snow, and the ranger said all of the creeks are really flowing and you're not going to have to melt snow. There's water everywhere. And so what did I do? I brought my standard Pocket Rocket Deluxe and just a 4-ounce canister, thinking that I was just going to need to be reheating, my hydrated meals and making hot chocolate and stuff like that. This would have been perfect for me. The challenge that I had was once I got up above 6,000 feet, there was just snow everywhere, and the creeks were absolutely flowing. But the issue was that there were these 6-foot-high snowbanks on every side of the creek, and if I was going to try to get down into that area, I probably would have slipped in, and I might have gotten all wet, or I might have possibly injured myself, and being able to climb back out of that just would have been a nightmare. So I didn't even try it. So on the first night, I wasn't actually able to get at water. And so I ended up having to melt snow using this 4-ounce canister and my standard stove, and that was not optimal. I ended up using probably about 95% of this canister on the first night, which was an issue because I had planned on eating hot breakfast, hot lunch, hot dinner, and making hot chocolates and all that, the whole 9 yards. And it was on the second day where I was actually thinking that this was going to run out that I was only able to get one more additional boil, which enabled me to make some ramen and then some hot chocolate. So day 2 definitely didn't get as much of my calorie intake or that hot meals and stuff like that I anticipated. Now I had dry food and like granola snacks or granola bars and stuff like that I could eat, so I definitely didn't go hungry, but I wasn't able to eat the food that I wanted to. I wasn't able to drink the hot drinks that I wanted to, and so that definitely impacted possibly my ability to stay warm. Now I also had plans for, or potentially had thought about on the second night when it was getting cold, that I would boil some water, put it into my Nalgene, and then put that down into my quilt at the bottom to just warm me up. And so at 2 in the morning when I was awake, I tried to start the stove and it literally fired up for about 2 seconds and then shut right down. So in the future, what I would say is, if you're thinking that you have any possibility of needing to melt snow and you're really not sure one way or the other, definitely bring more fuel, or bring at least the standard size container. Don't bring the small one. I probably would have been fine with the standard size container and my summer stove kit here. I just would have used more fuel. It would have maybe not been as fast or efficient as my specific for snow melting kit. The other thing is, the rangers, you definitely should heed their warnings or advice, but if they tell you something and you're thinking that, again, there might be some possibility that they're wrong, or that if they are wrong, how would you adapt or deal with that situation? Definitely think about that when you're asking rangers for advice. If it's going to involve something like needing to carry more fuel or less fuel or something like that, or if you need to carry more food or less food, you should figure, maybe if they're wrong, what would you do in that situation if they were wrong, and then just plan for that contingency. All right, number 4, sleeping pad. I brought with me my summer sleeping pad, which is an Uber Light and the short version of the Nemo switchback pad. I thought that I was going to be able to camp on hard surfaces, and I was expecting to be able to go up the Happy Isles Trail, which I figured I would be able to find some areas up there and not need to be camping on top of snow. Ultimately, that turned out to be incorrect, and so I was camping on top of snow with the lightest weight air pad possible, which didn't really give me a lot of warmth. I was fortunate to have this with me without having any style pad, an accordion pad or a closed cell foam pad. I just would have been freezing probably. So in the future, I would probably want to have a full version of that, so that the top portion or the bottom portion of my legs, which is typically where I would have the pad come down to, the short version would come to here and I would come all the way up to my head, and then I would put this on top of that. If I could do it over again, I would bring along the Xtherm. This has got just more R value. I think it has kind of a filament style of insulation in there, and this just would have kept me a lot warmer. I've used this for many years. It's very durable too. This is actually one that has lasted me a lot longer compared to the Uber Lights, which seem to develop a slow leak. This one has not leaked on me. This is at least 4 or 5 years old now, and it's still ticking. Okay, so that's the gear that didn't work quite so well for me. I'm curious, have you had similar challenges with your gear? Tell me about it in the comment section. I'd love to hear about it. And if you're enjoying this video so far, hit that like button. It definitely helps me out. And if you like this video, you might want to consider subscribing. Okay, so let's get on to the gear that really worked well. Right behind me here, this is the tent that I brought with me. I didn't actually use it on the first weekend. Like I said, I went cowboy camping, but on the second weekend, I definitely loved this tent. Now, it was super windy up there at the top of Yosemite Falls, and it was raining, it was hailing, it was snowing. I mean, it was everything. And at night, when the wind was blowing, I had all of these doors almost completely zipped up. One of the things that I really like about this tent, it's actually, I didn't mention the name, it's a Sling Fin Crossbow 2. It's a 4-season tent. Basically, it's got a full wall. and that means that, you know, there's no mesh part up here. It also has the ability to unzip the doors, so there is some ability to get ventilation. But the thing that I really like most about this tent, and wind is my nemesis, is its ability to block wind. When you're in places where it's super windy, whether it's really cold or just really windy, this tent is the tent for you. Now, I've used this tent in places where there's also things like blowing sand and, you know, blowing dirt or whatever, blowing across the ground. And this has helped me to keep from having sand blowing into my tent and stuff like that. So if I did not have this tent up there, being in the teens with only a 20F or 30F quilt like I had, I would have been freezing, absolutely freezing. When I had to get out of the tent, you know, to go to the bathroom or whatever, I was definitely immediately cold, and having this tent absolutely kept me a lot warmer. I was set up in a position where the wind was coming at me from the backside, just oriented like this. And on that backside, I had the door completely zipped shut, which kept all of that wind from getting inside the tent. So it definitely kept me warmer in terms of that wind off of me. Now, I was still cold, don't get me wrong, but I was much warmer having this tent. Okay, next piece of gear that really worked well for me and helped me out actually a lot was this is a sleep mask. Now, I don't typically bring a sleep mask with me on every backpacking trip, but on this particular trip, I had it with me, and I was going to be cowboy camping, and there was going to be a full moon, and I was thinking, if the moon is sitting directly above me and it's shining down on me, it can actually be pretty bright. And so on the first night when I was cowboy camping, I didn't wear it. But that next morning when I woke up and it was sunrise and I was kind of wanting to just go back to sleep, I threw this on, and that enabled me to actually go back to sleep for about 2 more hours. And then at that point, when the sun was up and it was warming up my quilt and just making me hot, I actually had to get out of there, and it just kind of woke me up. So on the second night, this actually really helped me out at night when it was really windy. I put this on and it kept my face warm. Now, I typically have on a balaclava, which covers pretty much everything around my face here, and knit hat, and then also a buff. I was still cold, and I had the buff pulled up over my face, and just this part of my eyes was showing. Now, that kept me mostly warm. However, the challenge was that the wind was just blowing over my eyelids. And as you're laying there trying to sleep, if somebody was blowing on your eyelids, it's just kind of distracting. And not only that, it was just freezing cold. And so I put this on, and I had it covering my face or my eyes, and I had the buff up over that, and I was just completely covered up over all of my skin. And so this helped me to stay warm. This has actually got kind of a little bit of thickness to it, and I'm not sure what the fill is in there, but it has really a soft kind of feel to it, so it's really comfortable wearing it. It also has a little kind of pinch style thing in there, so when you put it on, you can kind of pinch it down over your nose, and that just keeps that portion right there from letting in light. So this helped me out just in terms of not only helping me to sleep more, but also it helped me out to stay warmer, which is kind of crazy because when I put it in my pack and brought it with me, that was not something I anticipated doing, and I just did it at the moment, and it worked out perfectly for me. Okay, another piece of gear that really worked well for me, and this is something relatively new. I actually bought this based upon one of my viewers suggesting it from one of the other gear videos that I did, where I talked about the other pump that I use with my Thermarest pads. This is a flex tail gear. I'm not sure what the model is, but I'll put it in the description. It's just, the name is escaping me right now. It's a flex tail pump, and what this is it's basically a rechargeable pump, and you can attach it to the input portion of your pad, and it just works faster. The other Thermarest pump thing that I have been using for many years, it's slow. It takes probably at least 3 or 4 minutes for it to completely fill up, and then once it's filled up completely, according to the pump, it just doesn't fill anymore. So then you end up having to take that end off and then give it at least 2 or 3 more hard blows into it to get it fully filled. This flex tail has a lot more power to it, and when it fills it up all the way. So you don't have to dink around with, blowing into it more, which is just kind of nice. The other thing about this is it has a little light built in, And that's just kind of handy. I always have a headlamp as well as another little tent light, but just having another light just helped in those situations where I wanted to have more light inside the tent. So highly recommend considering this flex tail pump. It also has some other attachments. The other attachment here that I've got on me right now, this one can go on the end, and you can use that to help to start a fire or blow into the fire to get it going faster and quicker. So it's kind of got some multi-purpose aspect to it, which I'm all about having gear that's multi-purpose and doesn't just fill one need. Having something that's a flashlight and also a helpful fire starter thing is just, makes sense. So definitely would say this was something that I enjoyed using on this trip as well. Okay, last piece of gear I'm going to talk about is footwear. These are Zero Alpine waterproof boots. I actually had not worn boots on a backpacking trip since my first backpacking trip in 2009 to Great Smoky Mountain National Park. After that trip in 2009, I switched to wearing trail runners. Now, I went through various different types of trail runners, and I currently wear Lone Peak Ultras. I really like the large foot box and that toe, having that natural toe foot box there at the end. And I had actually been wearing the rain, snow, mud version, which is these ones right here, because of the waterproofing in the wintertime. And knowing that there was just a heck of a lot of snow up in the Sierra, I had brought both of these different kinds of shoes with me on this trip. And at the trailhead, I was thinking to myself, these probably are not going to cut it. They are not necessarily perfectly waterproof. I think they generally fail somewhere in the top portion here. So I would say in terms of their actual waterproofingness, they're not that great. Also, the fact that it's a low top, there's more chance of you stepping in water that's more than that depth and water just coming up over the top. Or if you're hiking over snow and all of that snow just gets kicked up all the time, it can just get in the top portion there a lot easier. So I did not wear these for this trip, and I was super glad about it. For this trip, I wore these Zero waterproof boots. And the other thing that I would say about these is they are absolutely waterproof. I did not experience any issues in terms of water coming into them. Now, I think I managed to get a little bit of dampness from the inside from just like my feet sweating, but that didn't impact my comfort level, I'll say. It also didn't necessarily make me feel squishy or anything like that on the inside. And when I took them off at night and then woke up in the morning, some of that evaporated, and so I didn't have any issues with them being damp on the inside at all. So I'm not saying that I'm switching back to boots or whatever, but for situations where I'm going to be hiking in the wintertime, backpacking, I'm probably going to be wearing these in the future. Another thing that I'll say about these is they seem to be way more durable. Now, granted, I only went on a couple nights backpacking for X number of miles wearing these, and they were brand new pretty much when I put them on for these trips. But at the end of that, they still look relatively brand new. Compared to the Ultras, which generally seem to always fail on this front portion here, this end piece just comes up and is always failing. Or other portions of it have just tears along here. Ultras are not that durable. They're great for backpacking in the summertime. I go through at least one pair of Ultras every single backpacking season. But my expectation after having worn these on this trip is that this particular pair is probably going to last me several seasons, which is great because, they're not necessarily cheap. And the fact is, I don't want to have to rebuy them every single year. The other thing is having this high top, it I think definitely helped in terms of when I was slipping and sliding during that first weekend up on the pure snow, and I just didn't have as much lateral movement. So having high top boots, it definitely does help in terms of stability. I am relatively strong down in my lower portion in terms of my ability to withstand those things, so I don't necessarily feel the need to wear boots, but they didn't necessarily negatively impact me in any way at all. So I would say these should be something that you consider for wintertime or situations where you're going to be encountering a lot of snow on the trail or a lot of water, and you want to have something that's absolutely waterproof. Forget about the Ultras. They are not waterproof. Get something different from a different brand. This Zero shoe, Xero is how it's spelled. I'm not sure. I think that's pronounced Zero. I had zero issues with water getting inside them. So I highly recommend these. Okay, so that's the 4 pieces of gear that work well for me on these trips. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you got some use out of it. And if you did, definitely hit that like and subscribe button. All right, happy trails.